The shuttle's landing struts kissed the crystalline platform with a whisper that seemed impossible for something weighing 40 tons. Through the viewport, James Kittrick watched three suns paint the palace spires in colors that didn't have names in any Earth language, something between violet and an emotion he couldn't quite identify. His stomach, still adjusting to the 72-hour journey through jump space, suggested it might be nausea. Diplomatic envoy from Earth. The port controller's voice crackled through the comm, the translation matrix rendering Volunteer syllables into flat, bureaucratic English. You will proceed to Customs Platform 7. You will submit to biological scanning. You will not deviate from designated pathways. You will not make sudden movements. You will not. Will I get a sandwich at some point? James interrupted, immediately regretting it as the comm went silent for a long, pointed moment. Sustenance will be provided according to your species' documented nutritional requirements. The voice finally responded, somehow conveying disapproval through an AI translator. Eventually, the airlock cycled with a hiss that sounded vaguely judgmental. James grabbed his single diplomatic case. Everything else had been deemed unnecessary by people who'd never actually negotiated with anyone, and stepped onto a world that had conquered 17 star systems before Earth had invented the steam engine. The customs platform turned out to be a floating disk of something that looked like mother of pearl but hummed with barely contained energy. A Volunteer customs officer stood at its center, and James got his first in-person look at the species that had Earth's politicians wetting themselves with worry. She looked human. Disconcertingly, almost insultingly human, from the bored expression on her face to the way she tapped one finger against her scanning device with bureaucratic impatience. Then she turned her head, and those ears, gracefully elongated, tapering to delicate points, moving independently like a cat's, marked her as something else entirely. Biological samples, she stated, not asked, extending a collection kit. What kind of samples are we talking about here? Because I feel like this is a conversation that should have happened before I left the shuttle. Epithelial cells. Standard procedure. She somehow made standard procedure sound like a threat. Unless you prefer we use the invasive scanning protocol. James took the kit. It was just a cheek swab, mercifully. You know, on Earth, we usually buy a guy dinner first. The officer's ears twitched, a motion he'd later learn indicated confusion. We have already established that sustenance will be provided eventually. Your statement lacks logical connection to current procedures. It's a joke. Humor has been noted in your species' cultural profile. It is considered inefficient. She processed his sample through a device that made concerning squelching noises. You are biologically cleared for palace entry. Your microbiome contains nothing that will kill us immediately. Please proceed to transport platform. That's the warmest welcome I've gotten in years. The transport platform turned out to be even more unsettling than the customs disk. A section of floor that simply detached and began gliding through the palace complex with no visible means of propulsion. James's knuckles went white, gripping the case handle as they soared between spires that seemed to grow organically from the planet's crust, passing through membranes of light that his eyes insisted were solid walls right until they passed through them. Other platforms floated by, carrying Volunteer nobles in clothes that seemed constructed from solidified starlight and strategic use of metallic thread. Each one glanced at him, those pointed ears swiveling to track his passage, with expressions ranging from curiosity to the sort of disdain usually reserved for something found on a shoe. A few younger ones pointed and made sounds his translator couldn't quite parse. He was fairly certain Barbarian was in there somewhere. The platform deposited him in an antechamber the size of a small stadium. The floor beneath his feet showed a perfect reflection of the vaulted ceiling above, creating a dizzying sense that he was suspended in space. Probably intentional. Everything about this place seemed designed to make visitors feel small and off balance. Human diplomat James Kittrick. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through his bones. You will wait here for processing. Processing of what? I was already processed. Additional processing. The Empress's schedule is absolute. When she is ready to acknowledge your presence, you will be summoned. This may take minutes. This may take hours. This may take days. James set down his case and sat on it, pulling out his datapad. No problem, I brought a book. The voice seemed taken aback. You would read, while waiting for an imperial audience. Well, I would juggle, but they wouldn't let me bring the pins. Silence then, juggling. Another joke. You folks really need to update those cultural profiles. The hours that followed confirmed that Velenthier Imperial Protocol was essentially weaponized boredom. Nobles drifted through the antechamber in small groups, their conversations dying as they noticed him, then resuming in hushed tones that definitely included variations of primitive and unfortunate genetic stock. His translator was getting quite the workout with creative insults. A military officer stopped in front of him, resplendent in armor that seemed to be made of solidified mercury. The decorations on his chest suggested he'd conquered at least 3 worlds before breakfast. You are the Earth representative. The officer's tone suggested he'd expected someone taller, or more impressive, or possibly someone who wasn't sitting on their luggage reading a mystery novel. Guilty as charged. The Empress will crush your world's petition for independence. You waste your time and hers with this charade. James looked up from his datapad. Tell you what, if we're both wasting time anyway, you want to hear the one about the Martian, the Venusian, and the artificial intelligence. The officer's ears flattened against his skull, an expression James would later learn meant extreme confusion bordering on offense. I do not want to hear any such thing. Your loss, it's a great joke. As the officer stalked away, muttering something about barbarians and the decline of proper diplomatic decorum, James caught something unexpected, a sound like wind chimes, musical and brief. He glanced around but saw no obvious source. Human. The omnipresent voice returned, now carrying a note of what might have been amusement. The Empress will see you now. Try not to embarrass your species more than you already have. No promises. A section of the wall that James would have sworn was solid suddenly wasn't, revealing a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. At its far end, where perspective turned strange and distance became negotiable, he could just make out a chamber blazing with light from 3 suns filtered through impossible architecture. Somewhere in that light, waiting in a throne that had seen the surrender of countless worlds, was the being who would decide Earth's fate. James picked up his case and walked forward, wondering if anyone had ever told the Empress of the Velenthier Empire a good joke before. He suspected the answer was no. The negotiations had been going in circles for 6 days, which James suspected was some kind of endurance test disguised as diplomacy. The conference chamber changed configuration each morning. Yesterday it had been a round table that slowly rotated, forcing everyone to constantly adjust their positions like some kind of bureaucratic carousel. Today it was a series of elevated platforms at different heights, presumably to reinforce the hierarchy of who mattered and who didn't. James's platform was, unsurprisingly, the lowest. Earth's proposal remains inadequate, announced Lord Vethais, a senior counselor whose ears were so heavily decorated with jeweled clips that James wondered if they affected his hearing. Your world offers nothing of value to the Empire. Your technology is primitive. Your resources are commonplace. Your strategic position is irrelevant. Tell us how you really feel, James muttered, scribbling notes on his datapad. The translator caught it. Several platforms worth of Velenthier nobles turned to stare at him with varying degrees of offense. Lord Vethais's ears quivered with indignation. Do you mock these proceedings, human? I'm just appreciating your directness. Very refreshing. On Earth, people would dance around this for weeks before getting to the "you're worthless" part. A sound rippled through the chamber that his translator tagged as scandalized murmuring. From the highest platform, partially obscured by what looked like a small, localized nebula of silver mist, came that wind chime sound he'd heard before. The murmuring stopped instantly. The human makes a valid observation. The Empress's voice carried no amplification but filled every corner of the space. Efficiency in communication is valuable. Lord Vethais, you have made your position clear for the third consecutive day. Do you have new arguments, or merely louder repetitions of old ones? Vethais's platform actually lowered slightly, which seemed to mortify him. Your Majesty, I merely seek to ensure. You seek to ensure your faction's preference for aggressive expansion is noted. It has been conceded. James tried not to smile. He'd been in enough meetings to recognize when someone was enjoying putting a blowhard in his place, regardless of species. The days developed a rhythm. Morning sessions in whatever geometrically improbable configuration the palace AI deemed appropriate for diplomatic discourse. Afternoons spent wandering the parts of the palace he was permitted to access, which seemed to expand slightly each day as if he were earning clearance by not actively causing incidents. Evenings in his quarters, a suite of rooms that adjusted themselves to his preferences in unsettling ways. The bed had grown softer over several nights, and he could have sworn the walls had shifted to a warmer color palette. He discovered that the palace had gardens, though calling them that seemed inadequate. Ecosystems might be more accurate, environmental bubbles containing flora from dozens of conquered worlds, maintained in perfect stasis. He'd taken to eating his lunch there, partly because the food was better than the diplomatic dining hall's attempts at human-compatible nutrition, and partly because it seemed to confuse his security detail. On the 8th day, he was examining something that looked like a flower but moved with deliberate intent when a shadow fell across the path. He looked up to find a young Velanthier woman, her ears adorned with simple silver bands that marked her as minor nobility or possibly military. She was staring at him with unconcealed fascination. You are the human diplomat. Last time I checked. Is it true your species finds our appearance disturbing? James nearly choked on whatever fruit equivalent he'd been eating. What? No, why would you think that? She gestured at her ears with something that might have been self-consciousness. The orientation briefings say that humans consider divergence from their base form to be unsettling, that you have limited experience with variance in appearance. The orientation briefings are written by people who have never actually talked to humans, aren't they? They are compiled from observational data and intercepted communications. So they're written by spies who have never actually talked to humans. He set down his lunch. Look, humans have been imagining what other intelligent life might look like for thousands of years. We've got everything from tentacle monsters to sentient clouds in our fiction. You folks basically look like us with better ears. It's actually kind of disappointing in a weird way. Her ears perked up literally, better ears. More articulate, expressive, ours just kind of sit there looking useless. She touched one ear gently, as if considering it for the first time. The Lord Commander says humans are repulsed by us. That our similarity to you makes the differences more disturbing. The Lord Commander says a lot of things, and most of them seem designed to make everyone feel terrible. James took another bite of his fruit. You want the truth. I've seen 300 people in this palace over the last week, and every single one of them has looked at me like I'm something they scraped off their boot. Not because of how anyone looks, but because apparently being from a planet that hasn't conquered anyone makes you cosmic trash. She blinked, processing this. You are not what the briefing suggested. Yeah, well, your Empress isn't what the briefing suggested either. You have spoken with her. Mostly I've watched her shut down pompous counselors, which has been the highlight of my week. He paused. Don't tell anyone I said that. The wind chime sound came from somewhere behind him. He turned to find he was no longer alone with the young noble. Half a dozen guards had materialized from apparently nowhere, and between them stood the Empress herself, without the theatrical fog or elevated platform, just standing on a garden path like a person. The young noble dropped to one knee so fast James heard it hit stone. He considered following suit, then decided he'd already committed to being the resident barbarian. "Your Majesty, I was just telling your." He glanced at the still kneeling woman, subject, staff member, person. "I was just explaining that your briefings on humans need updating." "I heard." The Empress moved closer, and James got his first clear look at her face. The briefings had called her beautiful in the clinical way intelligence reports describe anything. Eye color, facial structure, distinguishing marks. They hadn't mentioned the way those elongated ears moved with her thoughts, or the intelligence in eyes that had apparently seen the surrender of 17 star systems. "Commander Veles believes humans find us grotesque. This is not the first time I have heard this theory." "Commander Veles is an idiot," respectfully. Several guards made choking sounds. The young noble still kneeling on the path had gone completely rigid. The Empress's ears twitched in that confused gesture James was learning to recognize. Then that wind chime sound came again, and he realized with a start that she was laughing. "You are either very brave or very stupid, James Kittrick. I've been told I have a gift for being both simultaneously." She gestured, and the young noble scrambled to her feet and fled with remarkable speed. The guards remained, but stepped back to a distance that suggested they were pretending not to hear the conversation. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. James fell into step beside her, acutely aware that he was strolling through an imperial garden with someone who could order Earth's annexation before lunch and still have time for afternoon tea. "Tell me something, human. In your observation of my court, what have you noticed?" "That everyone's terrified of you. That half your counselors are trying to maneuver for advantage, while the other half are just trying not to get noticed. That you've got 17 star systems worth of conquered peoples, and not one person who will tell you when you have food in your teeth." "I do not have food in my teeth." "It's a metaphor, means nobody tells you the truth." They walked in silence for a moment, past something that looked like a crystallized waterfall frozen mid-cascade. "Your planet's petition for independence," she said finally. "You understand it will almost certainly be denied." "I understand that's what everyone keeps telling me. I also understand that if it were already definitely decided, you wouldn't waste a week listening to me be insulting in increasingly creative ways." The wind chimes sound again. "You believe your insults are creative. I called Lord Vethise's economic projections a masterclass in wishful thinking yesterday." His ears turned purple. "That is a stress response in our species. You essentially gave him the equivalent of a mild cardiac incident." "Should I apologize?" "Absolutely not. He has needed someone to challenge him for years." She stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "Why does Earth resist so adamantly? Joining the Empire offers protection, trade access, technological advancement, yet you cling to independence as if it were precious." "Because it is precious. Because deciding our own mistakes is better than having someone else's mistakes decided for us." He met her gaze, those two human eyes in that almost human face. "Because being conquered efficiently is still being conquered." For a long moment she simply looked at him, ears still in a posture he couldn't interpret. "You are an interesting problem, James Kittrick. I get that a lot. Tomorrow's session is cancelled. I am told the Palace AI is reconfiguring the negotiation chamber into something involving partial gravity inversion, and I find I lack the patience for watching Lord Vethise attempt to maintain dignity while floating." She turned to leave, then paused. "The gardens are open to you at any hour. You are the first person in memory to eat lunch here without checking first if it was permitted." She walked away, guards flowing around her like a silver tide, leaving James alone with the alien flowers and the distinct impression that something had just shifted in ways he didn't fully understand. He looked down at his half-eaten fruit. "Well," he said to nobody in particular, "that was either really good or really bad." The fruit didn't answer, but something that might have been a passing bird made a sound suspiciously like wind chimes. The summons came at what James's circadian rhythm insisted was 3 in the morning, though the palace's ambient lighting hadn't changed, and 2 of the 3 suns were still visible through his window. A messenger stood in his doorway, impeccably dressed and radiating the kind of patient disapproval that suggested he'd been waiting for James to wake up for some time. "The Empress requests your presence in the private audience chamber." James sat up, running a hand through his hair. Now, what happened to the whole days of waiting thing? "The Empress's schedule is absolute. When she wishes to see you immediately, you are seen immediately." "Right. Give me 5 minutes to look like I wasn't just drooling on my pillow." "You have 3 minutes. The Empress does not wait." The private audience chamber turned out to be smaller than James expected, which was to say it was only the size of a luxury apartment rather than a concert hall. The walls shifted with slow-moving patterns that might have been decorative or might have been displaying real-time data from across the empire. He couldn't tell. No guards were visible, though he suspected they were present in whatever passed for discreet around here. The Empress stood with her back to him, looking out a window at the city below. Without the theatrical lighting and elevated platforms, she seemed smaller somehow, more real. "Your Majesty, I'm told you wanted to see me," though nobody mentioned why, which seems like an oversight in the whole imperial protocol thing. She turned, and he caught something in her expression that surprised him. Uncertainty, maybe. It vanished quickly. "The treaty negotiations are a formality, you understand this." "I'd figured that out, yeah. We're dancing through steps everyone knows the ending to." "Then why do you persist? Why waste weeks on inevitability?" James shrugged. "Because sometimes the dancing matters more than the ending. Because going down saying what you actually think beats going down politely." She moved to a seating area that looked like it had been grown rather than built, settling into something between a chair and a sculpture. After a moment's hesitation, she gestured for him to sit as well. "I have a question for you, James Kittrick. It is not about treaties or trade agreements. Those are my favorite kind of questions. In your observations of my people, of this palace, of me." She paused, and her ears did something complicated that his limited understanding suggested was agitation. "What is your honest assessment?" "That's kind of broad. You want my thoughts on interior decorating, the food, the way everyone walks around like they're afraid of being noticed. I want your assessment of how we appear to you, to humans." James leaned back in his seat, which adjusted itself to his posture in a way that was probably expensive. "You're fishing for something specific. What did someone say?" "Answer the question." "You look like people. Surprisingly human people with better ears, which I maintain is unfair from an evolutionary standpoint." He watched her carefully. "But you're not asking about the general population, are you? This is personal." The silence stretched long enough that he thought he'd overstepped. Then she spoke, so quietly he almost missed it. "Humans were the first other intelligent species my people encountered. Did you know that? 400 years ago, before your people had faster-than-light travel, one of your generation ships passed through the outer edge of our territory. We studied you, observed you. Your physical form became our reference point for what intelligence looked like." "I didn't know that. The history briefings kind of glossed over first contact." "There was no contact. We watched from a distance and moved on. But the observation remained in our cultural consciousness." Her ears flattened slightly against her skull. "There are factions in my court who believe our resemblance to humanity is a weakness, that we are derivative, unoriginal, that the differences that do exist mark us as failed copies rather than distinct beings. That's the dumbest thing I've heard all week, and I sat through Lord Vethise's economic presentation." She looked at him sharply. "You dismiss it so easily." "Yeah, because it's nonsense." James shifted forward. "You want to know what humans actually thought when we figured out we weren't alone? We were terrified you'd be so different we couldn't communicate, that we'd have nothing in common, that we'd be ants trying to negotiate with gods." He gestured around the room. "Instead, we got people, People who happen to have articulated ears and better fashion sense, but people. You have no idea how much of a relief that was. Relief that we are not terrifying. Relief that we're not alone in the universe in some fundamental way. That intelligence comes in forms we can recognize and relate to. He paused. Though I'm pretty sure the terror came back when you started conquering everything in sight. The wind chime laugh, fair assessment. She stood and walked back to the window, her reflection ghosting across the surface. There is something else. A specific question I have considered asking multiple times and reconsidered just as often. We're alone in a room in the middle of the night having what I'm pretty sure is not an official diplomatic conversation. Might as well ask. She turned to face him fully, and something in her posture reminded him of the young noble in the garden, that same uncertain self-consciousness. Am I ugly to you, human? The question hung in the air like a held breath. James opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'm sorry, what? You heard the question. I'm asking if you find my appearance, specifically my appearance, to be ugly, disturbing, wrong. Her ears were rigid now, held in a position that suggested she was braced for impact. Humans resemble us closely enough that the differences become focal points. My ears are longer than they should be. My proportions are slightly incorrect. My features are almost right but fundamentally flawed. Who told you this? It does not matter who told me. Answer the question. James stood up, processing what he was hearing. You're serious. You actually think. He stopped, looking at her, really looking at her. At the way she held herself like every word might be a blow, at the vulnerability in asking something that clearly cost her to voice. How long have you been carrying this around? Answer the question, James Kittrick. No, hold on. You're the Empress of 17 star systems. You've got people literally trembling when you walk past. And you're asking me, a guy from a planet you could annex before breakfast, if you're ugly. Yes, the word came out sharp. I am asking you, because you are human and you have been honest when honesty should be dangerous, and I need to know if the resemblance that shaped my people's understanding of ourselves is close enough, or if we are simply cosmic mockeries of the form we measured ourselves against. James ran both hands through his hair, a gesture he made when situations went sideways in ways he hadn't prepared for. Okay. You want honest? Here's honest. The first time I saw one of your people, my immediate thought was elves. She blinked. Elves. Yeah, elves. We've got this whole mythology back on Earth about beings that look almost human but more elegant, more graceful, more beautiful in ways that make regular humans feel kind of shabby by comparison. He gestured at her ears. The ears are kind of the defining feature. Long and pointed and expressive. We've been writing stories about them for thousands of years. You are comparing me to mythology. I'm comparing you to beings we invented because apparently regular human beauty wasn't enough. We had to imagine something more. He took a step closer. You're asking if you're ugly. The Empress of the Velanthier Empire, who looks like she walked out of humanity's oldest stories about beauty and grace and beings that live in places mortals can't quite reach, is asking me if she's ugly. Her ears had shifted to a position he'd never seen before, almost trembling. The differences do not disturb you. The differences are the best part. Perfect similarity would be boring, uncanny, wrong. He found himself almost laughing at the absurdity of it. You could walk into any artistic community on Earth and have people lining up to paint you, sculpt you, write songs about you. Not despite the ears. Because of them. You are not lying to me out of diplomatic necessity. Your Majesty, I called your Lord Commander an idiot to your face. Do I seem like someone who lies diplomatically? The wind chime sound came again, but different this time. Less restrained. She turned back to the window, but her reflection showed something that might have been a smile. Elves, she said finally. We resemble your mythological elves. Basically, yeah. Though I'm guessing your elves probably don't have faster-than-light drives and planetary conquest down to a science. Our elves are fictional. So are ours. That's kind of the point of mythology. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the question and answer settling between them. "This conversation," she said finally, "does not leave this room. Wasn't planning on putting it in my report. Day 12. Empress asked if she was ugly, compared her to elves, possibly violated 17 diplomatic protocols. Seems like it would raise questions. You have definitely violated at least 17 diplomatic protocols. Great. I'll add it to my resume." She turned from the window and something in her posture had shifted. Lighter, maybe. "Your petition for Earth's independence will not be denied." James nearly fell over. "I'm sorry, what?" "The negotiations will continue for another week for the sake of appearances. There will be conditions and stipulations, but Earth will remain independent." Her ears tilted forward, and what he was learning meant amusement. "Consider it payment for honest answers, when honest answers should be impossible. You're buying Earth's independence with a compliment about elves. I am making a political decision based on multiple factors, one of which is that a human who speaks honestly is more valuable as an independent ally than a resentful subject." She moved toward the door. "You should return to your quarters. We both need plausible deniability about this conversation." "Right, of course. Just a normal middle-of-the-night chat about mythology and beauty standards." She paused at the doorway. "James Kittrick, thank you." "For what?" "For answering a question no one else would have answered honestly." Then she was gone, and James was alone in a room that suddenly felt much larger, trying to process what had just happened. He looked around at the empty chamber. "I just secured Earth's independence by comparing the Empress to elves," he said aloud. "They are never going to believe this in the report." The walls shifted their patterns in what might have been agreement, and somewhere in the distance, he could have sworn he heard wind chimes. The final treaty session was, mercifully, held in a room with normal gravity and furniture that stayed put. Lord Vethais looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 weeks, which James chose to interpret as a personal victory. The treaty itself was a masterwork of diplomatic language that boiled down to Earth, gets to do its own thing but promises not to be annoying about it. "The terms are acceptable," Vethais announced through what were clearly gritted teeth. "Though I maintain this sets a dangerous precedent for future negotiations." "Noted and ignored," the Empress said from her platform, which was only moderately elevated today. "Are there any other objections that have not been voiced in the previous 47 sessions?" Silence, beautiful, blessed silence. "Then this council is concluded. Earth's independence is formally recognized. May this mark the beginning of productive relations between our peoples." She stood, and everyone else scrambled to stand as well. "James Kittrick, remain. The rest of you are dismissed." The chamber emptied with remarkable speed. Apparently nobody wanted to linger when the Empress was in a dismissing mood. Within moments, James found himself alone with her and the ever-present invisible guards. "So," he said, "we did it. Earth gets to keep making its own mistakes. For now. In 50 years, someone else will likely petition for annexation when they see the benefits of imperial membership. Probably, humans are great at changing our minds." He picked up his datapad, scrolling through the final treaty language. "I have to ask, though, this clause about cultural exchange programs, was that really necessary?" "Extremely necessary. I have been informed by my research staff that Earth's mythology concerning elves is extensive and varied. I wish to understand how my people appear in your cultural imagination." James tried very hard not to smile. "Your Majesty, are you asking for humanity's elf fan fiction?" Her ears twitched in that confused gesture. "I do not understand that term." "You will, oh, you absolutely will." He saved the treaty file and looked up. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to enjoy it, most of it. Some of it is weird." "Weird how?" "Let's just say human imagination gets creative and leave it at that." The wind chime laugh echoed through the empty chamber. "I look forward to being disturbed. My cultural advisors have been entirely too comfortable lately." She descended from her platform. walking across the floor until she stood directly in front of him. Without the elevation and theatrical distance, she was almost exactly his height. "You have changed things here, James Kittrick. You may not see it, but I do. I mostly just insulted people and made inappropriate jokes at diplomatic functions. You treated me as a person first and an empress second. Do you understand how rare that is?" Her ears angled forward. "Commander Veles has been reassigned. He will be managing a mining station on the far edge of the Empire, where his theories about human disgust will not poison further negotiations." That seems like a long way to send someone for being wrong about aliens. He was not sent away for being wrong. He was sent away for making others believe his wrongness. She clasped her hands behind her back. "The young officer you met in the gardens, Saris, has requested transfer to the New Earth Embassy staff. She wishes to study human culture directly rather than through surveillance reports." Good for her. She seemed curious rather than scared, which is a better starting point than most. Others have followed her example. There is talk in the court now about perception and assumption, about the difference between observed data and actual understanding. She paused. "You threw a small stone into still water. The ripples will reach farther than you know." James shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable with the weight she was putting on what felt like stumbling through 2 weeks of barely controlled chaos. "I just answered questions honestly. That's not revolutionary. In a court where every word is calculated for advantage, it absolutely is." She turned toward the massive windows overlooking the city. "I have ruled for 23 years. In that time, I have accepted the surrender of 6 civilizations, negotiated 42 treaties, and made decisions that affected trillions of lives. And not once until you arrived did anyone ask me how I actually felt about any of it. That seems like a fundamental management failure. It is the nature of power. The more you accumulate, the more isolated you become. People see the position, not the person." Her reflection in the glass showed those long ears drooping slightly. "I have not had a genuine conversation in years, possibly decades." James set down his datapad and walked to stand beside her. "Well, you've got at least one now. The cultural exchange program runs both ways. Earth sending diplomats, scholars, artists. Someone's going to show up who treats you like a person who happens to have an impressive job rather than a walking apocalypse." You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's not impossible either. He looked out at the alien city, lights beginning to activate as the largest sun set below the horizon. "You asked me a question 2 nights ago. Can I ask you one?" "You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer." "Fair, here it is. Are you happy?" She went very still. "That is not a question anyone asks an empress." "I'm not asking an empress. I'm asking Serial Vex, who happens to be an empress, if she's happy with her life." The silence stretched so long he thought he'd finally found the line he shouldn't have crossed. Then she spoke, so quietly he almost missed it. "I do not know. I have been so focused on whether I was performing the role correctly that I never stopped to ask if the role itself brought me satisfaction." She turned to look at him. "You have given me much to think about, James Kittrick. Some of it welcome, some less so. The best questions usually are uncomfortable. Philosopher and diplomat, Earth sent a dangerous combination. Earth sent someone who was expendable enough that if I screwed up, they could disavow me and try again." He grinned. "Joke's on them, I somehow didn't screw up." "You absolutely did screw up, multiple times. You just did it in ways that were interesting rather than catastrophic." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the city transform as night fell. Finally, James cleared his throat. "I should probably head back. My shuttle leaves tomorrow, and I have about 6,000 forms to file about why the negotiations only took 2 weeks instead of the projected 3 months. Tell your superiors the Empress was efficient." "I'll tell them you were terrifying, and I feared for my life daily." "Better for your career, I suspect." She moved away from the window, then paused. "James Kittrick, when you return to Earth, what will you tell people about the Velanthier?" The truth, that you're people who built an empire, who struggle with the same questions about identity and worth that everyone does, and who look amazing in dramatic lighting. The wind chime sound filled the chamber. The dramatic lighting is important to maintain. It takes years to perfect. Worth every minute, I'm sure. She extended her hand in the human gesture she'd clearly researched. He shook it, feeling the slight difference in bone structure, the cooler temperature of her skin. May your journey home be swift, diplomat. May your empire continue to terrify people efficiently, Your Majesty. He made it 3 steps toward the door before she called out. James, the mythology you mentioned, the stories about elves. Yeah, are they good stories, worth reading? He turned back, grinning. The best ones are. Though fair warning, humans have spent thousands of years being weird about elves. You're going to find some stuff that's inspiring, some stuff that's beautiful, and some stuff that's going to make you question our entire species. I look forward to all 3 categories. 6 months later, James sat in his apartment on Earth, processing reports from the new embassy staff, when his secure comm chimed with an incoming message flagged as high-priority diplomatic traffic. He opened it to find a text communication from an imperial address. Your mythology was not exaggerating. Elves are indeed central to human artistic expression. I have been reading your Tolkien and find Middle-earth's geopolitics fascinating. However, I have questions about a subset of literature my staff categorized as fan-created content. Please explain why humans have written 47,000 stories about elf romance. This seems excessive even by your species standards. Also, what is a coffee shop AU, and why do so many of them involve immortal beings learning to use espresso machines? Requesting clarification, SV. James laughed hard enough that his cat jumped off the couch in alarm. He typed back, Your Majesty, I did warn you human imagination gets creative. The coffee shop thing is a long story. Also 47,000 is rookie numbers. Wait until you find the archive sites. You're going to need a drink, or several. Welcome to humanity. We're weird about everything, especially elves. JK. The response came back almost immediately. I am beginning to understand why your planet resisted annexation. You are all completely insane. I am promoting the cultural exchange program. This is too entertaining to stop now. Also, Commander Veli sent a formal complaint about his mining station assignment. I told him it was because he was wrong about humans and elves. He is very confused. This pleases me greatly. James grinned and settled in to write a proper response, one that would probably require explaining the entire history of human fantasy literature, and why people got emotionally attached to fictional characters with pointed ears. Outside his window, Earth continued spinning through space, independent and slightly insane and absolutely determined to remain that way. Somewhere in the palace gardens on a world 17 light-years away, an empress who looked like humanity's oldest dreams about beauty sat reading human mythology and laughing like wind chimes. The universe was vast and strange, and full of people trying to figure out if they were doing it right, regardless of whether they had normal ears or elegant pointed ones. James figured that was about as good as things got, all things considered. He started typing, ready to explain why humans had spent centuries being weird about elves, and why that weirdness was actually kind of beautiful if you looked at it right. Some conversations, he reflected, were worth having across the stars.